Officially welcoming everyone this evening. It's so good to see everyone. And we have a discussion in our Rebuilding Me 101 group. We are going to talk this evening about, is this where you stop? And it's a question at some point many of us would have to ask ourselves, maybe when you've hit some goals, or maybe you've hit some what you consider plateaus. But I'd like to start this discussion with a story from a guy that I learned a lot about from, and you'll see how it applies. Let me explain. He was very successful, and he shared this story. Something happened to him when he was young where he had to face that question, and it carried over to everything he did in his life. And let me just share this with you. He paid his way to Scotland from America to pay for a course that took him through the mountains and into the ocean in Scotland, where he got to test himself, learn some skills, and survive in both of those environments. And he recalls this one particular trip that he was on through a 5-day trek in the mountains. And he had gotten to a point after being what he thought was exhausted, where he just kind of sat down on the side of a rock and look how far he'd come. And he shook his head and he just said, I don't know if I can do this. This may be more than I can handle. As a young man, he looked out over where he had come and questioned his own ability, even the strength that he thought he had. And so as he was contemplating this, one of the guides, the mountain guides that were taking them through this journey and explaining and teaching them, came up and saw, kind of he was in a conundrum. And he asked him, he said, so what are you doing? He goes, I don't know if I can finish this. He said, I think I'm at the exhausted point. And so the guy just very simply said, so is this where you stop? And that kind of took Dan back, and he said, well, what do you mean? He goes, well, everybody has to stop somewhere. Is this where you stop? And he said, well, no, I want to go a little bit more. I want to go up there and stop. He says, okay, let's go up there and stop. And so Dan got up and he walked with him a little bit longer. Than that night, when they're kind of resting and getting ready for bed, he made it through the day. Next day, exhausted again, and here he is, like, okay, I went a little further, but really, I think I'm done. And the guy, sure enough, came up. Hey, is this it? Is this where you stop? He said that happened like 2 or 3 times. He says, I was really starting to hate this guy. So he had determined at this point that he's not going to get me again. So he kept working through it. And he said he woke up one morning and they were almost done with the trip. And he said, I got this. I'm there. I can finish this. And so he kept going. Later, Dan ended up winning an award. And during the evening, when they gave the awards out for finishing it and him actually doing very well, the guide came up to him at the award dinner after he got his certification. And he said, Dan, you were at a point up there on the mountain where your decision to keep going is now going to affect you for the rest of your life. And Dan realized, okay, that's probably true. And he thought about it. And he said, if you'd have quit up there, every time you had to face a trial or you had to test yourself, you'd have been remembering that you had stopped. He said, but now you have set a new bar for yourself. And this is going to affect you for the rest of your life. That man went on to become very successful. I mean, he's taught me a lot of things. He's taught actually people around the world things. And he attributes that time when he was a young man and he had to face that question, is this where you stop? I thought that was appropriate for us as a group because some of you have hit your plateaus. Some of you are still here and you had a goal to lose X amount of weight and you did it. Some of you did it in record time. Some of you just full out. So you've got to be asking yourself this question, is this where you stop? And then I know for a fact that some of you have had some setbacks, and that can be frustrating. Maybe you've had your moment on the side of that mountain, sitting on that rock saying, well, I've come pretty far and I'm happy, but I wonder if this is where I stop. So whether we've succeeded or whether we're facing one of those setbacks, we all have got to ask the question, is this where you stop? Man, I can relate to it because sometimes I don't even know, me and Dad, sometimes we wondered if I even really got started for a while there. Now we're really doing good and we're not stopping. So I thought that we would revisit this because we are making decisions now that are going to impact us for the rest of our life. In fact, Dan went on to take that and help a lot of other people, including me. And I will not be surprised at what we've got in store as a group, how we too may be able to help people as a group and individually. If you don't stop, and the things that you've learned and the endurance and the confidence that you've gained, who can you help in your life that don't or doesn't know the things that you're finding out? Are you kidding me? My whole life, nobody told me that. I didn't know that this diet did this and that my hormones take over and I don't even have control. It's not willpower. It's not self-discipline. I'd like to ask all of you, even those who may feel that you haven't accomplished a lot yet, or you're not yet where you want to be, what have you learned along the way that is going to help you in the future? And how many people would benefit if we shared some of that with them? So I thought, let's look at this from those 2 points of views. There's 2 big takeaways. We've already shared some of them about that story, but the second part of that story, which I really loved, is what would have happened if Dan had taken that trip through the mountains alone and got to that rock where he was looking out and said, man, I impressed myself. Look how far I came. But you know what? I'm kind of tired and I'm glad I did this, but I wonder if this is where I should stop. What if there was no guide? What if there wasn't a support group? What if there wasn't somebody there to say, hey, Dan, is this where you stop? And hearing that come back to him from somebody else with the implication like, well, wait a minute, I'm not done yet. You know, it kind of hit him. And so when we have a group together, isn't it the same thing? We can be that guide for each other when we sit on the rock and say, whoo, I didn't think I'd get this far. Maybe this is as far as I go. And maybe somebody holds our feet to the fire. Maybe somebody in a comment in the text asks you, okay, you went off, are you back yet? Or we do that for each other with just a simple phone call and say, man, you were looking good. Don't give it up. Remember we discussed James Clear book, The Habits, where he said, well, I love the point where it said, it's okay to fall and have a misstep and break our habit once, but don't ever break that habit twice in a row. You'll break it again, but don't ever do it twice in a row. You know why? We'll come off the mountain. Then it gets away from us, right? So whether we get that question answered and we do it on our own and we appreciate that we still have more to go, or we realize that that support group, that guide that ticked him off, that he said he didn't want to hear it again, but then later came up to him at the dinner and said, good for you, man. If you wouldn't have done that, where would you have been? See, that's what we can do for each other. We can push each other and then we can pat each other on the back when we work through those moments. So I'd like to ask this question. How about you? Have you learned enough? Or has it whet your appetite for all the things that you could still learn? And if you've attained your weight goal, was that it? I promise you, you're just touching the surface. If you think about some of the conversations we've had, what is your brain health like? What will your brain health be like 5-6 years from now if you stay with ketosis? And what if you wake up that mitochondria? You lost the weight perhaps, but what if you reactivate those tiny furnaces, those little tiny factories within the cells? Every cell has either a few hundred, or even over 1,000 of those energy converting, life imparting cells. And if you ever saw the animation of that, I just think it's like fireflies coming off of the eons when we take photosynthesis, the energy from the sun and from the plants, and the way we were created, we can synergize that, and these little mitochondria spring out life like butterflies and fireflies, and they go and rejuvenate your organs, your brain, stimulate your thinking, help you defeat Alzheimer's, Parkinson's disease, and the skin, all of the rejuvenation. We're only touching the surface. How many of us have even activated the human growth hormone? See, Alan's done that. He's done a few 72-hour fasts. I know Dad has done more than a few 72-hour fasts. You're activating human growth hormone on the level that you haven't seen since you were a teenager. In fact, it's medically impossible to get back to unless you get an exogenous injection or pill, or you stimulate it through autophagy and a window of time where you turn those on in the body. We're just touching on some of the effects to the brain, the mitochondria, the organs. We haven't even begun the journey to really see the benefits. And that was the purpose of me having this talk, is because if we quit now, just because we got a weight goal or we hit a stumbling block, the real benefits, looking back at Dan, who decades later could help other people and his whole life created a whole new trajectory. See, we could have that. Many of us are older in this group. We're not spring chickens, myself included, so I can say that. And we're going to face the effects of what we keep hearing about in all these reports. Well, it's part of old age. The liver gives out at old age. Your eyesight gives, and we're defying that. Many times we're saying, well, that's wrong. Why are we using that kind of terminology? Yeah, it's old age on the SAD diet, on the standard American diet or the Western diet. But there are plenty of people who have maintained healthy lifestyles, and they are embracing their life even in their older age. And they are playing with grandchildren. They are out hiking, or like Alan wants to do, kayak and continue to keep up on his mountain bike with Rita, who seems to be the Energizer Bunny. Is that right, Alan? Okay, we got you on record saying that, so I can quote you. Okay, so here's what we want to do is we want to open this up, and I want to unmute you. And what I'd like to do is let's hear from you about some of the goals that you've attained to and where you see yourself looking back 3 years. If you were to look back on your experience right now, what will have had to happen for you to have said, well, that was a success? See, what do you anticipate getting into and seeing manifest itself within your physical health and your body and your lifestyle, that if you project yourself 3 years, you can see that's what's coming? I'd like to hear from you, maybe some of your successes. And conversely, we could also hear what you would expect if you left this lifestyle. So